Influence is not something bad on its own. When you look at it, and what it does, you must consider other factors. Who is the person influencing? Who is the person opening oneself, making oneself available to being influenced? And what is the thing that is being influenced? What are the means by which something is influenced? The tools, the mechanisms that are in place to influence another, someone else. We live in a culture where that has become recently, it has been a crescendo, mind you. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't, and it isn't, the product of, let's say, the last generation of humans on this face of the earth, or one particular culture, one area of the world. No. This is a natural drive. When you look at the influencing, the process of influence, everything is influenced by everything else, of course. In essence, that's also at the basis of the essence or the characteristic, a key characteristic of causality. Today, people don't question the influence itself. Definitely they don't question the influencer and their motives and where they're coming from and what is it that they already have that requires to be influencing someone else with. So if you have an empty bottle, you're going to have an empty bottle being, if you pretend to be pouring something out of that bottle, then you're going to be pretending to have something that's obtaining that, empty thing. What I'm trying to say is, substance is missing. In fact, there's no substance in most of these things. What it does have, when you look at it, is to influence a person to keep someone in the dark, or to drag them further into some dark state of mind. You look around you, you go to the supermarket, you go and listen to, I guess, whatever they have for as music these days, whatever they have as audio visual, what your eyes are picking up, the flavors that you're exposed to as a biological organism to pick up as a living, breathing being. What are the things that are coming at you? This is a question that today people are not asking, which makes them be vacuous, which makes them be in a position of a receptacle, open receptacle, to receive whatever is coming at them. Now, probably now it's been a century, almost a century, since the invention of the television. Before the television, there was the radio. And outside influencers started coming into the house, into the household, into the home, into families, into the lives of people, where now your opinions were directly being influenced. Instead of you going outside, out of your path, to gain something, some knowledge, let's say read a newspaper, speak with some people, join a club, etc., etc. Now it's come into the house. So the child is no longer hearing what the parents believe. So you're starting to have the beginnings of schisms, breakaways. And it's okay because I'm not the only one, right? Quote unquote. Other people like me are like this also. So this, I think, was one of the beginning, stepping stones of this culture that we look at and see, the influencer culture. Now, who are these people that are trying to influence? Substanceless, usually. It is borrowing someone else's knowledge, borrowing something else. In the past, in the West at least, people used to borrow the information they would get from explorers coming in from Asia, from other parts of the world, from the Middle East. And they would repackage it, give it Western terms, and then, reintroduce it to the public, their public. And then you would have a following, readership. And you would become a person or the person to talk with, to speak, to ask questions about this topic. Now, this topic that you're writing about, does that make you an expert? Nowadays, even though much of the influencer culture is empty itself, it's vacuous, it is still functioning based on these mechanisms, which brings us back down to emotions, how we are feeling. Okay? So just like it is in sales, when you want to sell something, you want to tap into the emotion of the person. So people buy emotionally. They don't buy intellectually, because the mind is going to come in and say, wait a minute, I'm already in debt. I've maxed out on my credit cards. Why are you wanting me to go and buy this thing which obviously we don't need in the kitchen, in the house, in the car, or the car? We already have another one. And we're trying to pay off that debt. Why are you dragging me? But it's look at this, or it's like it makes me feel this, or other people have it too, and they're like me, they're my age, so why shouldn't I have that? And in time I'll pay off that debt, etc. What they're saying is, it makes me feel good. Basically, I want it. When there's a want, that means somebody has been triggered. Something has been triggered inside. So the fire got started inside. So there's a blaze going on. There's a passionate blaze for getting that. It doesn't have to, be something very expensive, or something really out there, something really big, really colorful, etc. But it feels like it is. It could be a toothpick. Okay, it could be a certain kind of a toothpick. It could be a pillow, but it could be a certain color, texture, fabric of a pillow. It could be anything that you tag with a certain emotion that makes you feel pleasure, hence the emotionality. So what these influencers have been doing is they look around outside of themselves for things that are selling. Again, these things could be intrinsic or extrinsic, having to do with the inside, internal of a person, or something to be coming in from the outside, something to be gained by accessing something outside of you, which is basically the mechanism of sales. You want to do this and go outside of yourself to obtain that and pay me with that, which is valuable, so that I can give you this thing which I believe is valuable, and I have to convince you that it is valuable, because it needs to add quality and texture and life into your life. supply and demand in a way. But it's convoluted. It's not true supply and demand because there's no demand. There's no need for it. Because you created a want. Want is not going to turn into a need unless there's a really deeply intrinsic unquestionable reality behind it, that it adds quality to your life. And you can start with something that is rejuvenating of the human heart, of the quality of your life. The quality of your life does not depend on adding more things to your life in the form of things. Whether it is a membership to a certain elite club, whether it is getting a new car, whether it is buying something, paying somebody something valuable in order for you to get it from them, instead of starting the fire inside, the fire of cleansing. See, the real influencers, the way I see it, have to do with wisdom and purity, which, the way I see it, is a reference to virtue. If you want to influence someone, virtue is the best influence. Virtue is the best delivery method of influence. Virtue is the best way to gain acceptability by yourself, towards yourself. Virtue is one of the best ways to accept yourself, therefore. Virtue is the best way to cleanse your mind, your heart, and the society around you. That is what saints were and are still. And that's why they're supposed to be rare. Society had to really struggle to go looking for saints from its midst. Even if a saint was living in the middle of a crowded city somewhere, society would still have a hard time finding the saint, because the saint would do everything in their power to not be exposed. They were not after the same influencer status that we see today in the world being promulgated, being advanced. They didn't go into people's homes in a form of a television or this or that to influence. Their influence was all about virtue and living and becoming more pure. And with their purity, they were trying to influence society. They were influencing the structure of society, people, children, adults, men, women, everybody. And they would do that without necessarily even saying much. They would do it in the fabric of their life, the way they lived their life, their everyday life, the way they moved, the way they spoke. Today, however, society has become lazy itself, and it doesn't want to put the effort to go looking for saints. The way I described it, influencers. It's looking for ways to create influencers left and right. And because the mechanisms are all there, the tools are all there. In the 90s, when the first desktop publishing programs were coming out, applications they used to be called, now it's apps, but on the desktop computer, Macintosh, Apple Macintosh was one of the first, if not the first, in my opinion, or to my understanding, of desktop publishing. Desktop publishing basically was how to print your own brochures, something as simple as making a template of, something that you advertise, and eventually it turned into not just printing like books and things, but it also became video. So I was looking at, in those days, I was also dabbling with computer graphics, and I come from a, traditional art, etc. background, and it was always tedious to say the least, and very challenging, and tough for many of us to leave behind the traditional, paintbrush, pencil, paper, drawing, painting world, and walk, or sculpting, and just going into the digital world. But everything was moving in that direction, so I jumped into that as well with such trepidation and fear. But you learned Photoshop, you learned After Effects, you learned different programs like 3D programs like Maya and all that. Now, of course, they've gone through many incarnations, if you will. Now, the problem is, or was, and still is, and become this behemoth of a problem. It gave people the illusion that you can be a creator. You can be an influencer. You can put your ideas out there. So no longer were you wanting to or needing to have somebody, some gallery owner, if you were an artist, let's say, wanting to get your paintings be displayed somewhere. You were pushing it out there. Now, of course, this has its positive side. It could have its positive sides, but it also has a lot of negative sides. Why? Remember the initial question I was, positing. What is it that you're influencing? What is it that you're promulgating? What is it that you are offering? If a baker makes delicious bread, nutritious, something nutritious, if a chef is creating something nutritious and is offering it to the people, they're offering something that's nutritious. Not something that you can put it on a shelf for 7.5 years and still it looks good. Good enough to eat, almost. There's something wrong with that. Fast food places, like McDonald's and Burger King and KFC, all these places, that are spread like wildfire around the world. What are they, is it nutritious really? So similarly, the influencer that you're exposing yourself to, or your child is exposing themselves to, or your partner, or your friends and things, family, what is it they're being influenced by? And really, is there a substance? And are they saying something really effective? Meaning, is it wholesome? Is it enhancing the quality of your life to the better? To the better. And this is one of the reasons why I walked away from the art world as such, because I realized that it was all about shock value. Like Picasso and all those characters, It was all about shock. Shocking the public, shocking. It became so grotesque, it stopped being art, in my opinion. And it was all about, well, you can make of it whatever you want, type of a thing. No! When you look at the Night Watchman of Rembrandt, it's still shocking, quote unquote, in a different way. It enhances your depth of understanding, creativity, imagination. It pulls you in. You stop. You look at a painting by Renoir. You look at, not just paintings and things or sculptures, but also in other forms of art. They were also influencing. But still, when you dig deep, you still look for the quality. of the person who's trying to influence. And that quality is what I'm referring to. The presence of, whether it is there or not. And it, being referred to here, is virtue. Virtue. Is the person virtuous? Meaning, how is their lifestyle? Today what you can do, you just have to turn on a web or speak to some friends, and then you see them mentioning here and there, or you looking at at billboards everywhere, and you see this. We went to a place recently, and it was the first time that I was leaving, the town that I live in, to go, took a bus and went to a city. And the first thing I saw, the bus stop, basically the station where the bus stopped, and we came out, and I looked, and there was a big billboard, and it stopped, by the way, in front of a school for teenagers. Right outside, there was this huge billboard of two women, barely dressed, almost completely naked, and it didn't leave much for imagination. Really pushing the envelope as to, it was all about sexuality, it was all about passion and lust, as well as envy. Passion and lust, let's say for a teenage boy, looking at that, already he's a bag of raging hormones. Now he's going to look for the closest thing that looks like a female. Now there are also images that are clearly selected. These women were selected to be, let's say, the most, attractive and lust-inducing in a person. So they don't necessarily reside in your life. They've been plucked out and placed right in front of your eyes. Whose eyes? Teenagers' eyes. Right outside their high school. And females are looking at that, and they look at their bodies, and they're nowhere near in their physicality close to what those two women are representing. Hypersexualized, this and that. So what you have here is tug of war. The tugging is happening because the children or the teenagers are looking at themselves and realizing there's not a hope in the world for me at this point to be looking like that, or to have that in my life as my girlfriend, let's say, for the boy. And for the female, to look like that. So reality and non-reality, the illusion, the seduction, the influence, that's where the tug of war is happening. So this is one of the quickest ways that you can destroy balance, quietude, intelligence, wisdom, peace, and virtue in the mind, in the hearts of people. Who? The beginning part of a generation. Teenagers. Years ago, as a psychotherapist, when I used to do community work, and I used to go to schools, both elementary and secondary. As I was leaving the gates of these schools, after I've done a long day's work of seeing patients or clients of, sometimes 10, 12 of them, since early morning all the way until the end. I mean, I would come in when the campus parking lot would be empty, practically, and then I would leave when it had emptied out. Thousands of kids coming and leaving. And then what I noticed was, as I was leaving the campus gates, I would see this huge billboard Huge. Bigger than the ones that you would see in a major city advertising, let's say, the new movie, the new Brad Pitt or something, movie coming out. And I would look, and what is this? It's a military ad. Join this, join the army, join the military, be all you can be, that nonsense. Come to the adventure, come. And if you come back to your life, we'll send you back amputated, messed up, and we won't support you. But we want you now so that you can, basically. Some people might not like those interpretations, but those are the facts, okay? You go and visit any VA hospital, you see this. You speak to any veteran, anywhere in the world nowadays, because... Anyhow, I don't want to get sidetracked, but what the thing is that I was trying to say is the influence. They had placed, I gave these two examples because where were they placed? Billboards. Outside the gates of education. And I'm not even saying what's inside, what posters, what books they're reading, what stories, what media, what advertisements they're hearing inside and outside in their own homes. But right at the entrance, or the exit of the school, you have these very well-funded influence placed. So you see, it's not a matter of some bozo over there trying to get millions of subscribers on YouTube or this or TikTok or whatever app they have nowadays, trying to get you to send, let's say, $1.50, or trying to get a monthly membership so they can, or just getting their millions of subscribers so they can just cash in on that influence, and teaching others and making money off of that, teaching the tricks and things like that to become more and more wealthy. It's also society doing that, and it's been doing that for ages. So now it's like the private, desktop publishing arena that's carried over. It's like an airplane that's lost one of its wings and it's spiraling downward. That's where I see society going. And the influencers, so-called influencers, today don't ask themselves, what am I influencing? Because what it takes is basically grow your beard and wear a turban and you're good to go. Or shave your head and change your name to something funky, interesting, exotic, ethnic, or whatever. And say something, bombastic, some wild things that are not based on personal experience, or some things that you've heard, you're borrowing from other things, and you're good to go. You're going to attract, a pile of freshly excreted dung from a cow or a dog or a human in the middle of the road is always, or anywhere, is always going to attract flies. So you have a lot of piles like that lying around. My point is, empty those. Clean up your room, clean up your world, clean up your mind, clean up your heart from these piles of dung that you've been collecting from these influencer types. Because it's, you have to ask the right question. Is this thing going to enhance my life? Just like the art. What is looking at a Picasso going to do? I know most people believe that Picasso was an artist, and some people, many listeners probably will not like that. I used to get a very strange look from people when I was back then in the Fine Arts Academy, and then as an artist and things like that, a painter, and you speak with colleagues, and I would like stand out as the guy who doesn't like Picasso, or people like that. Well, just to give you a snippet of, like in the painting arena or world, you have someone called a major artist. His name is Caravaggio, and he was known as the artist. And chiaroscuro, he came up with that technique, which was clarity through obscurity. And that is basically, in the dark, you would have his characters popping out of the painting. Talk about 3D on a 2D space. To this day, it's really, you stand in front of it, let's say, one of his paintings, and really it's mesmerizing. It pulls you in. And some of the churches if you go to Rome and Napoli, because he was from Napoli, I believe. Then years later, I was a big admirer of his, and I would try to mimic that in my paintings and the technique. But then later on, I found out about his character and how he died. He killed a guy, He was a murderer. And eventually they found him, and people just... so he lived a very immoral, unethical life, in a sense. And he died accordingly at the hands of some people, similarly. What we need to ask these questions. To be informed is a necessary thing. To be informed, what is it that I am trying to give to the world, to tell the world about? I remember when I was, earlier days, in the 90s, New Age was, really the thing. You had a lot of, people like Deepak Chopra and others, Wayne Dyer and all those characters, and so it was in a boom. Anybody who had as I was saying, exotic name, or wore something, a different outfit, or spoke in a certain way, spoke about things that were, wow, So my friends approached me and they said, because we would have dinners or sit down and talk over tea or coffee, and they would ask questions, I would share, and I was in my 20s. They would try to encourage me to write books on matters, on Buddhism, on religion, on practice, on yoga, which were things that I had already studied for several years. And I would laugh at that suggestion, because I would say, I'm not qualified. But then I would browse through these books that I was seeing from all these characters that I mentioned and more. And I would be surprised, because all I see is borrowed information. It's undigested food. But it's catchy. These people were selling tickets like hotcakes. They were sold out shows of people, in Los Angeles, in the 90s I'm talking. So you would be lucky to find a ticket, a seat, in any of these auditoriums that they would come out on stage and talk about things for hours and hours and never say something, really. Or just share with you things that you already know. It's available, freely available. The Buddha talked about that. Other teachers have talked about that. It's available, but they repackaged it. They titled it differently. You see this now in the world of therapy, trauma therapy, other forms of therapy, where you come up with something and you give it a catchy name, a catchy phrase, a catchy term, and then some publishing houses approach you, some companies approach you, and they say, hey, can you make a manual on this? Because we see a huge potential here. Sure, yeah. So you trademark it, you copyright it, and then suddenly you create a formula, which is, by the way, a copy of other formulas that you've picked up from other books, other sources, other lectures you've gone to, and now you have a certification program. And there's no limits how many layers, how many gradations, how many levels you can make or turn it into. Each one you can charge them a few $1,000s or euros. And then people show off, walk around with these pieces of paper that mean nothing ultimately. But you can set yourself apart from others by saying, I'm level 4 therapist in this, MBSR or other nonsense like that. Or even trauma therapy. Why? You don't need all that. But you need that to satisfy your level of acceptability in your mind by setting yourself apart from other people and becoming a person of a saintly, quote-unquote, caliber for society to look upon with awe and give you some reverence, some veneration, some respectability, some attention. Attention. Just like that girl who looks at herself and says, what can I do? Because I don't look anything near that model over there half naked or practically naked. I don't look like her, this and that. So she does something else. Whatever is in her power. She can wear less clothing. She can get tattoos on her neck, on her arms, behave in obscene manners, throw herself at the boys around her, sullying her. And the same goes with the boy, with the guy. So it's a miracle when a person goes through these teenage years at the hands of society, with everybody coming and trying to influence from the government, from society, from everywhere. Educational systems, because the educational system has everything to do. They're in cahoots with the people who put that poster, the billboard outside, They're getting a cut. They're getting their own share. So it's a miracle when a human being comes out and then tries to have a decent heart, decent character, who's caring really about the world, the environment, not because society tells him to care, because that's the in thing, that's the hip thing to do. No, because they feel there's something wrong with this picture, with this, and they're not afraid. A real influencer does not care if they're an influencer or not, if people are listening to them or not, because they're influenced by the right things. Virtue, purity of heart, evolution, bringing beauty into the world. Whatever it is, education, art, any arena of human endeavor has to bring in beauty. That's why people were mesmerized by Lord Buddha's presence, by his disciples. When Venerable Sariputta was looking for, on his spiritual quest, and he was basically struggling, he and Kolita, his best friend, two of them who became the chief disciples of Lord Buddha, they were banging their heads, as a matter of speaking, to find a good teacher, to find a good teaching. They wanted to be influenced because they were ready. They knew what they wanted, and they wanted to be free from suffering, from pain, from wanting, from running after craving this and that, this and that. And they had everything, by the way. They came from the top, highest echelon of society in those days. They were well educated, well off. Pleasure was always available. Money was limitless. And they had all the respect they wanted, or they were receiving it even if they didn't want it, by society. And they were young. They were young. In their 30s. Had everything. But they were unhappy. So they asked the right questions. And then the answer showed up in the form of a bhikkhu, a Buddhist monk, walking quietly, but in a beautiful way. Enough so that it stopped Upatissa or Sariputta in his tracks, and it was like, who is this man? Now, at the time he was following another teacher. But he said this, but he left him because he's like, this is not, your path is not leading me to happiness, to truth, to understanding, because I want to reach the end of suffering. But he looked and he saw this person has something, and he carefully followed him for half a day. And the bhikkhu walked with his bowl from door to door. People gave him some food, and then he went and sat silently, quietly, in seclusion, somewhere in nature, and started eating his food. And after he finished, Sariputta, or Upatissa, being a lay person at the time, said, now I can approach him. I'm not going to be invading his space, but I want to approach him respectfully. So he did. And he said, who's your teacher? What is it? Who are you? And he says, oh, my teacher is Lord Buddha, the Blessed One, Gautama, the recluse, Samana, Gautama. And he says, what does your teacher teach? He says, oh, my teacher teaches, his Dhamma is so deep, I'm not qualified to tell you in depth. Then he says, okay, could you share with me a nugget, or like a brief? If you give me a little, I will be satisfied with the little. I will take it, and it will be much. I will turn it into much, the little that you give me. And he does share just a little bit, but what I'm after is, he was moved without Venerable Assaji, that was the Venerable One's name, the bhikkhu whom he saw, and he was influenced by, without saying a single word. That's character. His virtue was abundantly overflowing from the brim of who he was. You don't have to say much. You don't have to do much. You don't have to put yourself out there so much. You don't have to be on every platform and sell, getting a PR agent to do your advertisement, to sell you to public. So that's influence, the way I see it. Why? Because it changed the person who was influenced enough so that the person went and found his buddy, Kolita, and together they actually first went to their teacher, Sanjaya, and they tried to convince him to go with them to this new teacher without even having seen Lord Buddha. He had just heard one part of a verse. That was enough. But their teacher is so mesmerized with his following, he's like, you go ahead and find, it's good that you found your teacher, your new teacher, but not every student is like you. There's always those crowds of people, and they're the multitude, who will need a mediocre teacher, like myself, he says. So I'm happy where I am, he says. And most of those students leave with Upatissa and Kolita, and they go to Lord Buddha, who becomes their teacher. Why? Because of his purity. So my question here is that I'm inviting people to think about, listeners who are interested in what I have to share, is what is it that you want? Where are you coming from with the desire to be influenced by? First of all, what is your heart vacuous? Do you have ulterior motives? What is your goal? For example, people have often encouraged me in some cases try to really influence me to charge money for the things that I make available, the teachings or the books, and then the suttas. I just giggle, I laugh. It's like, what right do I have? Well, you're putting all your life, like every ounce of energy goes to this. Yeah, I wake up early morning, I have my own practice, and my whole day with, my practice, it's ongoing. But primarily, aside from that, and eating some food, that's my life. Working to translate the suttas, answering questions like this, and making it available. Because let the truth influence, not me. If there's truth in there, I'm not worried. And whoever's really thirsty for it, they will find it. There's so many voices out there. So many, especially in this arena of Buddhist this and that. That people represent themselves as Buddhist, or even monks, actual bona fide looking, monks. Great. I'm just hoping that the virtue in their heart is unshakable, and their character is similarly pure, and there is no self there involved of gaining something for me. Because there are nowadays books on the Dhamma that are being sold by bhikkhus, by monks, monastics, which is such, I don't understand that. It goes against what I believe in. So it is important to give, and the purity of your heart has to be there. And then don't worry about, I want to be an influencer. No, that's the wrong objective. That's the wrong objective. That means you're lacking severely the right stuff you're wrongly influenced to begin with. You're influenced wrongly by the wrong, basically you're influenced by the wrong motives. There's a problem already. Close your mouth, go into your attic, go into your workshop, and continue working on yourself first. Venerable Assaji had worked on himself. Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mahamoggallana, they worked on themselves. Every single saint has worked on themselves, deserving of the title saint. In our tradition we call them arahants. Fully awakened, fourth stage awakened ones. But none of them had the motive of, I want to go there to influence. There's a story of a bhikkhu who was in correspondence with a very wealthy practitioner. The wealthy practitioner was a layman. He was a householder. That's why wealthy, that's what I meant. In those days, what you can say, in today's terms, he was a billionaire, multi-billionaire probably. But he was a third stage awakened one. He was a householder, upasaka. That meant he at least kept 5 precepts. But he was also an avid student, a follower, and a practitioner above all. And he was also an elucidator. He was an explainer, expositor, someone who would teach the Dhamma even to monks. That's how good he was. He was Chitta, the householder. And he had heard about this monk without having met him. he would send back and forth. People did use letters, nowadays people think, oh, they didn't have writing. Oh, they did. And in addition to correspondences with this young bhikkhu, he would also send money for the supporters, for those people close to him, attendants to support him. So anyhow, sometime later, the correspondence is stopped for whatever reason. And then Chitta, the householder, is somewhere and he's attending a Dhamma talk. Some question and answer situation is happening, and a bhikkhu gets up and teaches. He also exhibits certain psychic powers because of the situation. He does it very, very conservatively. He doesn't do it to show off. He doesn't do it to impress. He doesn't do it to influence anyone. Imagine if these people around the world, let me just talk about the bhikkhus, or those people who are religious, or not just Buddhist or Theravadan monks, people who claim to be religiously based, let's say, or having some motif associated with their work or what they're selling. If they really had one of those psychic abilities, what would they do? What would they do? It blows their mind, because it's unthinkable, because that's the goal that they want. They want to be superhuman in their influence, because they have not amounted to anything. They have not accepted themselves. They have a lot of emotional, psychological, mommy, daddy, society didn't like me as issue, deeply. A saint is somebody who's okay. They have settled in the beauty of every day they drink from the virtue in their hearts. Just like that bhikkhu. And Chitta, who's there, was mostly quiet, and at the end he says, I would like to support you for the rest of your life, to the bhikkhu, without knowing who he is. And the bhikkhu doesn't say anything. Now remember, he had witnessed something miraculous. Not just him, others too. And he asks the bhikkhu about his name. And the bhikkhu says, and Chitta, the householder, goes and stops, and he pulls back and he says, there was a bhikkhu once that I actually was supporting. And I used to have correspondences with him. But unfortunately, suddenly the communication stopped. Bhante, could you possibly be that bhikkhu? And the bhikkhu doesn't, say, but basically he understands that it was him. The next morning, Chitta gets up and goes to the residence where that bhikkhu was staying, or where he was lodging, and he looks everywhere. Guess what? The place, the kuti, the hut where that bhikkhu was staying for that night, had been wiped clean, everything put in order, and the bhikkhu was nowhere in sight. He had left the entire region, not just the city, the country. He had left the whole thing. Look at this. He was now being offered support for the rest of his life. He definitely influenced this, not just any person. He was a Dhamma practitioner. He was awakened, third stage. He was an anagami, a lay person. But he was an arahant. But also he was very concerned about what that would mean for the other bhikkhus who didn't have those abilities that he did. Now that was going to create jealousy, that was going to create strife, that was going to create envy, that was going to create some type of a division in people's mind, and saying, look at Chitta, the householder, he's supportive of that monk because he has some goodies in his in his toolbox. He has special qualities, he's psychic, he's this, he's that. To avoid all that, and the opportunity, quote unquote, he walked away. How many people can do that today? walking away from that status that is granted to you by society. Now, it could be in any arena. I'm referring to the religious arena, but it could be in the realm of politics, something as, completely different than religion. It could be in the realm of economics, finances, celebrity, fame. Because that's what it comes down to. You have to be famous for yourself. And virtue gives you irreplaceable fame, irreplaceable beauty in your heart, unimaginable tranquility, and cleanliness. And you become the refuge of safety for yourself. And that is what Lord Buddha always encourages us, to find refuge in us. But you won't find that if you keep leaking outside of yourself, going into this billboard, that person, that, trying to be influenced by them. First check where you're coming from. What is it that you want or need specifically? And really do your work. Is this person exhibiting himself, herself, as a person who really has the right stuff? And what is my estimation of right stuff? Let me go and check that, the sources. You have to do some digging, just like the foods that you go and buy from the store. You don't buy anything, hopefully, that you see advertised. You have to go and look at the back of the nutritional facts to see how much sugar does this thing have, because, oh boy, everything these days has, and the supermarkets has sugar. So you're being influenced by your nutrition intake, the air you breathe. So, without spreading out too much, I think I said enough on this. So check yourself. There's plenty of influence to be had there. Sukhyot.